I wanted to respect your space. There's certain things that I do before I go on stage, and I didn't want that to...
A deep voice that crosses generations, a calm smile that soothes crowds, and a presence so magnetic that the moment he steps on stage, the entire world pays attention. This is Snoop Dogg, the undisputed king of hip-hop, pop culture's cool uncle, the man who turned Long Beach into a global legend. But while the entire planet knows his jokes, his memes, and that laid-back style of someone who seems to float through life, there's a story no one tells, a truth so heavy that not even Hollywood's cameras can capture it. Because in recent years, while you watched Snoop smiling on TV, playing with Martha Stewart, or going viral on the internet, he was living a silent nightmare. Devastating losses. Fears that wake you up in the middle of the night, and a loneliness so deep that not even the most crowded studio can fill it. The man who taught America to chill was secretly falling apart inside. So what really happens when the most relaxed guy in the world can't show he's crumbling? Get ready. Because this story goes far beyond the music. Calvin Cortazar Broadus Jr. entered this world in 1971, right in the heart of Long Beach, California, during one of the most violent periods in the city's history. This wasn't a neighborhood where children played safely in the streets. This was a war zone where survival was a daily lesson, and opportunities were as rare as quiet nights. Calvin never knew what it meant to have a father at home. His dad left when he was barely 3 months old, shipped off to Vietnam, and never looked back. No letters, no phone calls, no explanation, just emptiness where a father figure should have been. When a stepfather appeared, Calvin thought maybe things would change, but after one explosive argument, that hope vanished too. So Calvin grew up with 2 anchors in his life. His mother, who worked endlessly to keep the family together, and music, which became his escape from a reality that offered nothing but violence and dead ends. His mother called him Snoopy because of his long face and playful personality, just like the cartoon character. A simple nickname that would eventually play piano and tried to make his mother proud. Outside those walls, he was learning the language of the streets. In Long Beach during the late 80s and early 90s, you either learned how to survive or you became a victim. There was no middle ground. By his teenage years, Calvin was already deep in gang territory, running with the Rollin 20 Crips. Not because he wanted to be a gangster, but because in that environment you joined for protection or you got destroyed. His musical talent was obvious to everyone who heard him rap, but the legal troubles came just as fast. Drug possession, multiple arrests, prison sentences. At one point, he was even connected to a gang-related death. Most kids from Long Beach during that era never made it out. They either ended up dead or locked up for life. But music kept calling. Even behind bars, Calvin would rap for other inmates just to pass the time. And it was those same inmates who told him something he'd never forget. "You don't belong here, man. You've got something real. Don't let this place kill your future." Those words planted a seed that would eventually change everything. In the early 90s, opportunity finally knocked, but not in the way anyone expected. Calvin and his friend Warren G had been sending demo tapes to every record label they could find. Every single one came back with rejection or just disappeared into the void. They were about to give up when Warren G played one of their tracks at a party. Someone in the crowd started nodding his head, locked into the flow. That someone was Dr. Dre. Listened to the entire track and immediately knew he'd found something special. He called Calvin to invite him to the studio. Calvin thought it was a prank and hung up. When Dre called back a second time, Calvin finally believed it was real. The moment Calvin stepped into that studio in 1992 to record Deep Cover, everything shifted. His voice had a texture nobody else could replicate. Smooth, effortless, dangerous, and hypnotic all at once. Then came The Chronic, where Calvin became an essential part of Dre's masterpiece. But it was Doggy Style that turned him into a cultural phenomenon. The album sold nearly 1 million copies in its first week, hit #1 on the Billboard charts, and went quadruple platinum within a year. A kid who used to dodge police in Long Beach was now standing at the absolute peak of the music industry. But fame came with a price that nobody warned him about. In 1996, Calvin was acquitted in a high-profile murder case that had the entire nation watching. After that trial, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He walked away from the gang world for good, not because he was scared, but because he realized he wanted to build something real, not just survive another day. Throughout the 2000s, Snoop reinvented himself over and over. From hardcore gangster rapper to family man, entrepreneur, pop culture icon, and eventually Martha Stewart's unlikely best friend. He became the guy who could make anyone laugh, the uncle everyone wished they had, the living meme who seemed untouchable by pain or pressure. But in 2024, life reminded him that no amount of fame or money can protect you from the cruelty of loss. And when tragedy struck twice within weeks, the mask he'd been wearing for decades started to crack. In early 2024, Calvin received a phone call that shattered his world. His daughter, Corey, just 24 years old, had suffered a severe stroke. The girl he used to carry on his shoulders, the one who called him Daddy in that sweet voice, was now lying motionless in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. Corey had battled lupus since childhood, dealing with constant pain, exhaustion, and uncertainty. But a stroke? Nobody saw that coming. Calvin didn't cry at the hospital, at least not where anyone could see. He just held her hand, squeezing it tight, as if his grip alone could pull her back from the edge. People saw him in the hallways, wearing sunglasses and a hoodie, standing completely still like a statue. But those sunglasses weren't a style choice. They were hiding eyes that were red and swollen from sleepless nights and silent tears. In the days after Corey's stroke, Calvin didn't go back to his own bedroom. He went into her room, closed the door, and stayed there. No lights, no food, no conversation. His wife grew so concerned that she called a psychologist when Calvin started saying things that terrified the entire family. "If she doesn't make it, I don't want to be here either." The man who had survived gang wars, murder trials, and decades in the music industry was now breaking down like a lost child. Some nights people could hear him sobbing through the walls, crying so hard it sounded like he couldn't breathe. He'd collapse on the floor, clutching old photos of Corey, whispering over and over, "I wish I could take this away from her." Facing a lifetime of violence on the streets had been easier than watching his daughter lie there, unable to move, unable to speak. And just when he thought the pain couldn't get any worse, the second blow came. Just weeks after Corey's stroke, Calvin's brother Bing Worthington died suddenly. No warning, no goodbye. Just a phone call with 2 words that crushed him. Bing's gone. To the public, Bing was just a behind-the-scenes guy, someone who worked with Snoop but wasn't famous. But to Calvin, Bing was everything. He was the witness to every mistake Calvin ever made, every close call with death, every secret he buried deep and never spoke about publicly. Bing was the only person Calvin didn't have to perform for. No Snoop Dogg persona, no cool demeanor, no pressure to be anyone other than himself. When Bing died, Calvin didn't just lose his brother. He lost the last person who knew every version of him, the good, the bad, and the broken. The world saw an Instagram post with a black and white photo and a few lines of tribute. But they didn't see the empty kitchen where Bing used to make coffee every morning. They didn't see the couch that still smelled like his cologne. They didn't see Calvin staring at his phone, looking at Bing's name in his contacts, knowing those messages would never be answered again. For 30 years, Snoop had been familiar with death. Tupac was shot. Nate Dogg passed away. DMX didn't survive. He'd carried grief before, but there was always some distance. Not this time. This time, death walked straight into his home and took the 2 people he thought he'd protect forever. 2 names, 2 losses. And suddenly, Calvin's entire world felt like it was collapsing in slow motion. People assume celebrities have support teams to help them through tough times, but the truth is, fame just hides the pain better. Snoop still had to sign contracts, show up for interviews, smile for the cameras and pretend everything was fine, because hundreds of people depended on his image for their livelihoods. The Snoop Dogg brand couldn't collapse just because Calvin was hurting. So on the outside, he smiled on talk shows, joked with Jimmy Kimmel, took pictures with fans and attended events with Martha Stewart. But inside, he felt hollow. Every night after the cameras turned off, he'd drive around Los Angeles alone with no destination, no music, just silence and the weight of everything he'd lost. Rappers from the same era said they'd never seen Snoop so quiet. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of someone who didn't know what to say anymore. The losses of 2024 didn't just hurt Calvin in the present. They dragged him back to the past he thought he'd escaped, back to Long Beach, back to the feeling of abandonment he first knew when his father left, back to the nights when he believed everyone he loved would eventually disappear. Most people thought Snoop was bulletproof, a guy who survived gangs, violence, and murder trials. What could possibly break him? But life has a cruel way of finding your weakest point. And Calvin's weakest point was never fame or money. It was family. And in 2024, life took what neither the streets nor the courts ever could, the people he loved most. The pattern of loss in 2024 mirrored his childhood in a way that felt almost intentional. When Calvin was 3 months old, his father abandoned him. No explanation, no second chances, just gone. That absence became the first wound, a twisted definition of family that Calvin carried his entire life. Then growing up in Long Beach, where the murder rate in the late 80s was among the highest in California, Calvin learned to expect bad news. Someone got shot yesterday. Someone got arrested this morning. Someone died last week. Tragedy in Long Beach never came alone. It came in waves. So when 2024 arrived, Calvin's brain didn't respond like a 54-year-old man. It responded like a 17-year-old kid sitting in a broken-down house on the east side, hearing once again that someone he loved was gone. That feeling of having people ripped away from you, it came back in full force, not faded by time at all. People say time heals all wounds, but with trauma like Calvin's, time just covers it up. And when something triggers it, the wound explodes open as if it never healed. There's a truth Snoop rarely talks about, but everyone close to him knows. For years, he's carried a deep fear that everyone he loves will leave. That's not just celebrity anxiety. That's childhood PTSD that never went away. In 2024, when his daughter almost died and his brother actually did, that primal fear came roaring back like a ghost he thought he'd left behind decades ago. The irony is that all of America only sees Snoop, the hip-hop legend, the fun uncle, the meme king. But in the moment his family was falling apart, nobody saw Calvin, the deeply traumatized man from Long Beach who spent his whole life terrified of abandonment. What hurt him wasn't just the events themselves. It was the memories they brought with them. Seeing his daughter lying motionless in that hospital bed brought back memories of his mother crying when his father left. Hearing about his brother's death made him remember every friend from the past who got shot without warning. The current pain just kept stacking on top of the old pain, like chains wrapping tighter and tighter around his chest. Some fans asked, "Snoop's been through so much. Why is this breaking him now?" The answer is simple. With gangs and guns, he knew how to survive. But with illness and death of loved ones, he was completely powerless. There's no street code that can save your daughter from lupus. No freestyle can bring your brother back to life. No amount of charisma can hide the feeling that once again, you've lost someone you love. Calvin had learned to stand strong against gangs, courts, and media attacks. But in front of a hospital bed, in front of a phone call announcing death, every layer of Snoop Dogg fell away instantly. This is the psychological pattern the public never sees. Overcoming trauma in the past doesn't make you immune to pain. It just means you're used to a different kind of pain. The pain of violence, of danger, of living fast. But pain from family loss, that's where he had no armor. That's where Calvin was completely exposed. And when the losses of 2024 hit back to back, it was like every childhood memory came flooding back, the feeling of everything important slipping through his fingers. A feeling he'd buried for 30 years, suddenly returned as vivid as the first day. A longtime collaborator once said, "Snoop never really left Long Beach behind. He just learned to live with it." And 2024 was the year Long Beach came back to collect its debt. For most people, childhood is just a memory. For Calvin, childhood was a locked room. He walked away from it, but the room never left him. And when his daughter collapsed and his brother died, that door swung wide open. No light inside, no way out. Just the feeling of losing loved ones, a feeling he thought he'd escaped forever. But trauma has its own memory. It knows exactly when to return. That's why audiences felt something different about Snoop during that time. No more familiar jokes, no more fun live streams, no more of that Uncle Snoop energy everyone loved. Because at that moment, the person standing in front of them wasn't Snoop. It was Calvin, reliving what he'd spent half his life trying to forget. And beneath all of that was an even bigger battle. The battle between the legendary Snoop Dogg and Calvin, the broken man trying to survive one more day. There's a cruel paradox every Snoop Dogg fan has felt, but few dare to say out loud. The more famous he became, the more cool, the more iconic, the less he was allowed to show pain. Snoop Dogg stopped being just a person a long time ago. He became a brand, a cultural asset. The hip-hop uncle who could make an entire studio burst into laughter with just one line. And because of that, all his real emotions, especially sadness, had to stay hidden like something that wasn't allowed to exist in public. Sponsors need a version of Snoop who's always happy, always comfortable, as if he's floating through life without stress or struggle. TV shows need a witty, quick-thinking Snoop who delivers punchlines on command. Advertising campaigns need a permanently chill Snoop, the guy who, even with the world burning behind him, still shows up with that half-smile and deep voice, as if everything will work out in the end. The market doesn't allow you to be sad, and it definitely doesn't allow you to collapse. Because if he shows exhaustion just once, contracts get questioned, campaigns get delayed, and brands start asking, can Snoop still maintain his vibe? That's why even when his life hit rock bottom, the audience barely noticed. He might have just left his daughter's hospital room with eyes still red from lack of sleep, but on set, he was required to wear those dark glasses and hide everything behind the mask. He could have just received news of his brother's death. But the next day, he still had to film commercials and maintain that signature smile Hollywood had turned into an icon. It's not that he wanted to pretend, it's that the system demanded it. Fame isn't just spotlights and applause. It's a contract. It's an expectation. It's the livelihood of dozens of people depending on one person's shoulders. And when he's in pain, it's not just him who might collapse. The entire machine of people behind him could fall apart too. That's why the public never sees Snoop Dogg break down. Not because he's stronger than everyone else, but because he hides it better. Snoop wears sunglasses not for style, but because they're the easiest way to hide eyes that are always at risk of turning red from exhaustion, anxiety, or tears he just finished crying. He delivers that half smile not because life has never hurt him, but because the moment he stops smiling, the whole world immediately asks, what's wrong with Snoop? He cracks jokes in every interview, not just because it's his personality, but because it's the only thing that helps him maintain the boundary between Snoop the legend in front of the camera and Calvin the man trying not to fall apart behind it. The truth is, the title Coolest Man Alive sounds like a compliment, but for him it's a beautiful curse. Because the cooler you are, the more people assume you're always okay. The more people believe you don't know how to be sad, the more they forget that Calvin, the boy from Long Beach, is still there, still carrying emotional scars from a gang-filled youth, still bearing the worries of a father, a brother, and a provider. The cooler you are, the harder it is to be understood. Coolness made him an icon, but it also stole his right to be vulnerable. And then 2024 came crashing in. 2 back-to-back losses hit him like punches he never saw coming. His daughter on the brink of life and death, his brother gone suddenly. Those events didn't just cause him pain. They made the mask called Snoop Dogg feel unbearably heavy. People ask why he still smiled on the darkest days, because if he didn't smile, he'd collapse. And if he collapsed, the whole world would see. It was a quiet tragedy that only people who'd followed him for 3 decades truly understood. Snoop Dogg, the man America placed on a pedestal of chill, was never allowed to grieve like a normal human being. You're supposed to be everyone's laughter, but your own pain can't be seen by anyone. But it was from that dangerous edge standing between complete collapse and having to keep hiding his suffering that something unexpected happened. Because when you're on that cliff, you only have 2 choices: give up or transform. And Snoop, even at 54 years old, even after a lifetime of chaos, still chose the second option. While people got used to seeing Snoop Dogg as a jovial icon, a cultural symbol who could light up any room with a single joke, the truth is that this very image locked him into a mask he couldn't remove. When America calls you Uncle Hip Hop and the coolest man alive, they don't realize those flattering titles also mean you're not allowed to stumble, shake, or even sigh. Because behind that light-as-air smile wasn't just Snoop Dogg, a national treasure and the face of countless advertising deals, but also Calvin, a man struggling to keep his family from falling apart. In Hollywood, Snoop Dogg is an asset, but Calvin's grief, exhaustion, and fear, those are luxuries he can't afford. In recent years, he still leaned back comfortably on talk shows, still cracked jokes that made audiences roar, but nobody saw his hands clenching under the table as if trying to hold on to the last bit of calm he had left. You see a tall man in dark glasses smiling at the camera, but that's only half the story. The other half was him sitting alone in hotel rooms at 3 in the morning, with a packed filming schedule and contracts waiting to be signed, but his heart stuck in a hospital where his daughter was fighting for every breath. Many people think he's chill because he wants to be. No. He's chill because the contract requires it, because sponsors need that image, because a sad Snoop Dogg could destroy an entire marketing campaign. That's the dark side of being a legend. The cooler you are, the less right you have to be weak. The title coolest man alive sounds impressive, but to him it felt like a curse, because when you're seen as immortal, nobody believes you can feel pain. When you're always the source of joy for others, nobody thinks to ask if you're okay. And when all of America was used to Snoop Dogg dropping jokes that made entire studios laugh, who would accept seeing Calvin, the man trembling from losing his brother, exhausted from his daughter's struggle, lost somewhere between laughter and tears? Perhaps the cruelest thing for an artist isn't the blinding spotlight. It's having to live in that spotlight even when your heart just wants to dim for a moment to ease the exhaustion. But it was the series of events from the 1996 trial to the punches of 2024 that forced him to choose the hardest path of all: change. And Snoop changed in ways nobody expected. He stopped glorifying death like in the Doggy-style years. He started talking about life, about forgiveness, about keeping families from drifting apart in the storm. After 1996, he began shifting direction. But it wasn't until he faced the real possibility of losing his child, and then actually losing his brother, that the promise he made years ago became genuine determination. Calvin, not Snoop, decided he wouldn't let violence, hatred, or fame take away what was left of his family. Many people thought his reggae or gospel work was just a publicity stunt. But when you look deeper, you see it's therapy. It's how a survivor finds a path to healing. Among the flights, the shoots, the crowded stages, Calvin found peace not in the spotlight but in slow melodies, in the trembling rhythm of church organs, in prayers he'd never spoken aloud. If rap helped him survive Long Beach, then faith helped him get through his 50s without completely falling apart. Pain, strangely enough, taught him something fame never did: that life is too short to hold grudges. In recent years, he's lost too much to waste time hating anyone. Every time he said goodbye to a loved one, he reminded himself, "I don't have as much time as I thought." From that point on, he reconciled with people he'd been at odds with. He fought less, argued less, let his ego drive his life less. What outsiders see as maturity is actually self-protection. The people who suffer the most often become the kindest. That's also why Snoop transitioned from the role of survivor to guide. He showed up in studios with young artists not to show off, but to warn them. The fame trap is real. He told them about exploitative contracts, about fast money with even faster risks, about friends who change when you get famous, about the price nobody talks about when the spotlight shines on your face. Those words didn't come from books. They came from tears, not the advice of a legendary rapper, but of a man who's experienced almost every possible loss life can offer. And that was the crucial turning point. From a gang runaway, Calvin became the mentor for an entire new generation, helping them avoid the traps that almost killed him. From someone once seen as a threat to America, he became someone parents invited to speak to their children about discipline, family, and kindness. An arc that only those who've hit absolute rock bottom can truly understand. Among all those layers of pain, responsibility, and expectation, the truth is that Snoop Dogg, at 54 years old, no longer cares about Grammys, chart positions, or records. He cares about something else, whether what he does makes anyone's life a little less miserable. and the fact that someone who once lived in complete darkness can now bring light to others. That is the true legacy, because in the end, it was that very change, that transformation, that helped him move forward. And it's also what creates a legacy far greater than any golden trophy Hollywood could ever award. After more than 3 decades in the spotlight, people got comfortable with the image of an invincible, laid-back Snoop Dogg with that half-smile, turning every moment into a cultural phenomenon. But behind the million-view crip walks and jokes that made America laugh was a layer of memories the press never mentioned. A shattered childhood, old wounds that lingered all the way to age 54. The strange thing is, those very pains, the things that once defined his survival, have now become the foundation for a legacy no other rapper of his era has achieved. Since 2005, Snoop has done something nobody expected and nobody fully understood at first. He poured money, time and heart into the Snoop Youth Football League, a project that started small with just a few hundred inner-city kids. 20 years later, over 60,000 young people avoided the cycle of gangs thanks to a football jersey and a man who stubbornly stood behind them. For Snoop, this isn't some flashy charity campaign. This is how he repays a debt to his childhood by fixing the broken years when he was pushed into the streets without a real choice. No cameras, no talk show applause, no viral hashtags, just one quiet promise. I got lost once. You don't have to. Then there's Special Stars, a program for children with disabilities. It was born from deeply personal pain. Corey, his daughter, lived with lupus since childhood, went through depression, medications, and days so exhausting she couldn't get out of bed. Snoop understands what it's like to feel terrified watching your child grow weaker bit by bit. That feeling of helplessness led him to create a space where children's society often labels too weak to fit in could feel seen, valued, and included. He couldn't completely heal his daughter's pain, but he could build a world where kids like her wouldn't be left out. The irony is stunning. The very person once considered a criminal icon of the 90s became a national treasure. At the 2024 Paris Olympics, he went from hiding in safe houses out of fear of assassination to carrying the Olympic torch in front of millions. This wasn't just a rapper's comeback. This was the journey of a survivor. He crip walked through Paris with a warm smile that melted athletes and spectators alike. He was no longer a cultural outsider. He became the bridge, the laughter, the breath of America itself. At 54, Snoop moves slower, speaks softer. His voice carries a warmth and gentleness, as if he's weathered too many cold winds and finally found shelter. But within that slowness is a peace only those who've touched the depths of sorrow truly know. A deeper understanding of life. He no longer runs from his past, nor does he parade it around. He simply uses it to love more, forgive more, and pave safer roads for the next generation to walk than the ones he had to survive. Tragedy hurt him, but it didn't destroy him. It just made him choose kindness over bitterness. And perhaps for that very reason, Snoop Dogg's tragedy isn't just heartbreaking. It's beautiful in the most human way possible. Someone who suffered deeply but chose to live more kindly. Someone who lost so much but still got up to protect other people's children. That's why Snoop's story doesn't end in sadness. It ends in quiet victory. A man who never allowed darkness to define him. All analysis and commentary in this video are based on information available at the time of production. Content is subject to change over time and should not be considered definitive. There's still so much more to explore. Stories of legacy, resilience, and truth. Feel free to dive into more of our recommended videos now appearing on your screen.